Hey everybody, what's going on? Helmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about a few of the champion adjustments that are going to be happening post-item rework, as there are a bunch of champions that interact in different ways with the item system, and so Riot have basically already headed off some of them in the past to say, okay, yes, we acknowledge that these champions are doing things a little bit differently from other champions in regards to how they interact with certain stats, so we're going to tweak them in advance. We already know that these changes need to be made. Now, obviously, there will be more balance changes in the future, right? Are not just going to settle for the item system is perfect as is, but at least at the moment, it's really easy for them to see these particular champions will need some changes to make sure they still function in a universe where items are different, where certain stats are different, where certain mechanics are different. So obviously, if Ezreal ends up being completely broken because he can build 5 Tiamats and kill you instantly with 1 Q, right? Like, those will be balance changes that do happen sometime in the future, but either way, at the moment, these are just the easy ones for Riot to do. First and foremost, let's talk about the crit champions. A bunch of champions that interact differently with crit will be receiving changes on this coming patch. Mostly, these are just to make them interact better with the item system or to interact in the same way that they did previously, but some of these are actual functional changes. So first and foremost, Jhin is getting less AD per crit chance because it's easier to itemize more critical strike in the game currently. It's on penetration items like Lord Dominik's Regards, it's on some of your defensive items, it's on your core items. Some core items even give you more crit per items you build. So certain items are giving you even more crit than listed because you have certain key or certain mythics, I should say. So either way, Jhin is getting less AD per critical strike chance because he can get higher critical strike chance in general. So I do like where that is at. I think technically it's a net nerf because he has to build more crit to be back to where he was before, but it also isn't that hard for him to build more crit, especially if he's going something silly like the double Infinity Edge build. He can afford to do that and get the critical strike chance out of it. Caitlyn is in the same boat as Jhin. She's getting less damage on her headshots than before because, again, it's easier for her to get critical strike chance than it was before. So she should be able to itemize it more effectively, which means that she is not going to get as much benefit from it. What this means is that these champions are technically nerfed at early levels, or at 1 or 2 items, because they're getting less damage than they're used to from their crit, but it does mean that at 3 items, 4 items, they are technically going to be at the same spot as they were before, so in general, they'll be feeling just as well after a couple items as they were on live. Senna's also getting some interesting changes here. She has higher crit damage than before. Right now, she's doing 130% damage on live, whereas on PvE, her crits are doing 150% damage. That is a buff. But she's also getting less critical strike chance from souls. Again, this is probably because she can more effectively itemize critical strike chance in the new item system. However, Riot are also giving her a few other changes. She has a better critical strike chance to lifesteal conversion. So she actually gets more lifesteal out of crit than she used to before. So I'm not quite sure why Riot made that particular change, but I'm guessing it's because it's easier for her to get more crit. So if she can get to crit or 100% crit faster, then it's easier for her to gain more lifesteal off of that. But on top of that, she's getting a couple other buffs. Her movement speed on E now has an AP ratio, and the AP ratio on her R have also been increased. Not really sure why these changes are going through, but it is technically just a net buff to Senna, so Senna should still be feeling totally fine after the item system swap goes live. And in general, it feels like Senna generally didn't itemize much crit in the first place. She generally went for a more on-hit or lethality focused build, so we'll see how she decides she wants to interact with the new system when it does go live. Now, Tryndamere is also getting a couple of changes here. He has lower critical strike chance per point of Fury, but a higher cap. So what this means is that Tryndamere will feel a little bit worse at low Fury, because he won't have nearly as much critical strike chance as he's used to, but because the cap is higher, it means he'll feel better when he's at maximum Fury. So in general, I do kind of like where that change is at for Tryndamere. I think it's totally fine. It's a small buff. I wouldn't say it's anything huge, but it will make Tryndamere feel a little bit better when he does hit that maximum crit strike chance, and it does mean that, like a first item Infinity Edge, he'll feel pretty good about that. And finally, Yasuo and Yone are getting some changes here. They have a higher bonus critical strike chance than they did before, so they now not just double their critical strike chance. They increase their critical strike chance by 150% as opposed to 100%. So you build one crit item, you go up to 75% crit as opposed to 25% crit, which is a big deal, but they have a higher reduction on their critical strike damage. So instead of dealing 10% reduced damage on their crits, they're dealing 15% reduced damage on their crits. Now, I believe the way this is going to work is that if you build crit in excess of 100%, it still counts that critical strike chance as existing. So if you build 2 items on Yasuo and Yone, you technically have 200% crit chance. Obviously, that just means you're guaranteed to crit every auto attack, but it also means that now they are back at a break-even point where they currently are. So it means, if that's the case, it means they'll feel worse on 1 item, but the same as they do on live once they hit 2 items. So technically, it's an early game nerf to both Yasuo and Yone, but I don't feel like that in general is an egregious change, especially given that, like I said before, there are significantly more choices for critical strike items in the game currently, so you don't necessarily feel as bad because you can sort of flex your build around depending on what you actually need for the scenario, as opposed to basically saying, I know I'm going to go Phantom Dancer, I know I'm going to go Infinity Edge as my first 2 items. You have some more options, so that does kind of make sense. Finally, moving on to some sort of assorted champion changes that are basically getting tweaks in order to make them function a little bit better with the new system. Ornn is only going to be able to upgrade mythics. This is technically a nerf to Ornn because he used to be able to upgrade at least 2 of the items that he himself bought. So if Ornn went Abyssal Mask into Sunfire Cape or either way, he would get to upgrade both of those items. If he went Righteous Glory, if he went a couple other items, he would be allowed to upgrade both of them. Whereas currently he will only be allowed to upgrade whichever mythic he builds and nothing else. Technically, this is an Ornn nerf. I don't feel like it's entirely problematic, though. I do feel like Ornn's been very strong for a while, and that is one of the little appreciated facts about playing Ornn, is that you did just give your team essentially 7,000 bonus gold as the game went on because you were able to upgrade so many items. So I don't think it's a terrible thing. There are some interesting interactions that mean that if you decide you want to swap your mythic item later in the game and Ornn's already upgraded it, well, you're kind of SOL at that point. Or if you haven't built in a mythic item by the time Ornn finally gets around to upgrading you, again, you can't really benefit from that. But since I feel like most champions are going to be building their mythic first, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Viktor, I think, is the biggest casualty of the item changes. He is losing the Hex Core in its entirety. Now he will get an evolution point whenever he finishes a mythic or legendary item, and it also doesn't say anything about his ultimate automatically upgrading, which leads me to believe that his ultimate is now one of the abilities he can upgrade with an evolution point. Now, this is, I think, honestly, a net nerf to Viktor. He was always about late game because of the stats that Hex Core gave him, just how Viktor scaled in the first place. He wanted to get that full Hex Core upgraded, then he kind of wanted to work on his first couple items, and that was sort of by the time Viktor got to late game, because of how much damage the perfect Hex Core was giving him, he was just able to kind of melt faces. But now that's not exactly the case. He can't force himself to get the full upgrades right off the bat. Like, that's just straight not an option for Ornn anymore. For Viktor anymore, not Ornn. We're done talking about Ornn. But either way, so I'm a little sad about that. He now has to hit 4 items, not counting his boots, in order to actually get his full kit online. He also doesn't automatically upgrade his ultimate. He now has to spend an upgrade point for that. So just in general, it feels like Viktor is really getting kind of screwed on this change. Now, again, the only reason Riot decided to make this change in the first place is because otherwise Viktor wouldn't get to interact with the new mythic item system. And there are a lot of items that Viktor would want to build in the new system. If he wants to build something like Liandry's Anguish, if he wants to build the new Luden's Echo, if he wants to build Everfrost, Rocket Belt, what have you, he couldn't if you do what a lot of people on Twitter and Reddit and elsewhere have been saying, and if you make Viktor's Hex Core his mythic item. If that's his mythic, well, then he can't buy another mythic. So even if he wants Liandry's Anguish, well, tough luck, Viktor, you don't actually get to build that. So on one hand, I get why Riot didn't take that route for Viktor's mythic item, because it would just preclude so much of his ability to participate in the game. I would love it if Hexcore came back as an optional item that Viktor could build, because it just felt so flavorful, it just felt so thematically satisfying. I just don't see a lot of reason for why they would take that out, but You know, I do kind of get it, and it does allow him to continue to use the current item system, so I guess I can't be too salty about it whatsoever, but it does feel pretty bad that he's going to be losing such a flavorful aspect of his kit in favor of this sort of feels bad playstyle. Hopefully Riot will find a way to tweak this so he feels a little bit better in the future, but either way, that's where we're at right now. Now, Elise is getting a very small change here. It's not even really items based, but because her Spider Q will now apply on hit effects, which is a little interesting. It does mean that she synergizes a little bit better with certain AD or on hit builds. She has the option of going for something like that, so that could be interesting for Elise, but either way, it does also mean that she can apply red buffs, so there are some reasons for Elise to have that buff. Katarina actually has some pretty big changes here, though. Her passive is now applying on-hit effects to all units struck, as is her ultimate. So Katarina will just straight get to say, all of my abilities are proccing on-hit effects. That means that if you have a Lich Bane on Katarina, if you have a Liandry's Torment, if you have a Blade of the Rune King, she gets to just apply all these on-hit effects whenever she uses one of her various spinning moves. Now, that is a pretty big buff on its face. However, it does mean that she would have to be itemizing items that have on-hit effects in the first place, which there are some I can see Katarina building, but there are a lot more where I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, you could build Wit's End on Katarina, but I don't really think you want to, especially not if you want to build something like Ginsu's Rage Blade. There's just no reason for Kat to have that much bonus attack speed, except for the fact that her R also now is split into magic or physical damage. It has an attack speed scaling on the damage, which is a really weird thing to say, but it means that on-hit Katarina is kind of sort of viable. You could go a Ginsu's Rage Blade Katarina build and build more crit and get all of that on-hit magic damage and not feel too bad about it, plus have the ability to, when you have no cooldowns, if you mess up your combo and didn't get the frag, to just kind of run people down and auto-attack them to death. There are some options there for Katarina to play with. Obviously, this buff is in exchange for the loss of Hextech Gunblade, which was one of her core items. It was pretty much the first thing she always built, so that's why these changes are around, or being made in the first place, to compensate her for the fact that she can't build Gunblade. So I do get the change. It does mean I think Katarina will have some really wonky build paths at first, but once players sort of get around the fact that, yes, you can build attack speed on Katarina and you're not trolling, I think there will be some interesting and fun builds and potentially broken builds as well. Along a similar path, Kayle is getting a change as well, where her attack speed per Zeal stack, and that's not the Zeal the item, that's of her passive, now scales with AP. Again, she's another champion that built Gunblade as her first item. She really benefited from all of the on-hit effects, and because the loss of Gunblade, and that's sort of like the first item she built, this is to make Kayle feel a little bit better about more AP builds. Now, in general, I think that the lack of a good AP Mythic sort of precludes that option. I don't really feel like there's any AP Mythic that Kayle particularly wants. It really does feel like I will be experimenting with Kayle going a Kraken Slayer, Ginsu's Rage Blade, crit but not crit build, because of how Ginsu interacts with crit. But either way, it is an interesting change. It does mean that if you decide to go a full AP Kayle build, you'll still have the attack speed to benefit from her, so that could be quite interesting. It does mean that if you build some incidental AP, that it is giving you more of a benefit than just going straight attack speed. So either way, I think it's going to be interesting to play around with that. And that's going to be it for these changes, guys. I think a lot of them make sense in context once you kind of do the math and break it down and look at the items that exist in the system. But let me know what you guys are thinking of this down in the comments section below. If you have any particular thoughts about where these item changes are at and how they're affecting your favorite champion, let me know all of that down in the comments. Would love to hear it. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.